I just wondered if I could just get a bit more clarity on some of the questions that have already been asked, specifically about the cost of the stockpiling and also the alternative options. And the figure was put on the cost of stockpiling at around 2 billion, and I wondered whether that was accurate. And is that cost wholly being borne by industry, or have you had any support or any indication of support from government?
So I think if you look at 6 weeks of medicines, the cash value to buy the 6 weeks is about £500 million. And then you have to look at the cost of working capital that will be tied up, which will be much smaller, so I don't know, 30 to 50 million, something like that. I think the 30 to 50 million will fall on everybody. I think for the cash, I think for smaller companies, cash is obviously a much bigger issue, and therefore I think it's the smaller companies that we are most concerned about in terms of their ability to do what we would like them to do in terms of organising stockpiles.
I think in answer to the second part, in Matt Hancock's letter, I think of the 23rd of August, he said that the government would look at options to cover the cost of storage.
Yeah, and in terms of what's happened since that letter, that was obviously 2 months ago. So.
Yes, and the government has continued to look at those options, and they haven't made any, as I understand it, any public decisions.
Right. Okay. And then about these alternative options that need to be considered in addition to stockpiling, because as we've heard from evidence, stockpiling alone will not be enough for some particular pharmaceuticals. Again, have you got any indication from government about what specific support they are going to extend to you to be able to carry out, whether it's the airlifting that you mentioned or any of the other options that you might be considering?
Well, I think we're at the phase where I'd expect the government now to have a good view about what stockpiling will do. And I think we're in the phase now of working through what those other options are. So, for instance, 90% of medicines come in through Dover and Folkestone on roll-off lorries. There's clearly a different way of supplying the UK, which is called lift-on, lift-off, through different ports. At the moment, almost no companies have actually got that as a secure supply chain. So I think we would need some help to try and establish that as an alternative way of bringing things in. So that would need to be revalidated and worked through. We're looking at what sort of capacity is there available through airlines. Again, we do quite a lot of lifting of, say, clinical trials. Clinical trials is another good example where we can't store the medicines. So typically we would deliver those through airlines anyway. Work that's ongoing at the moment from our perspective is also to try and find out what capacity is available, recognising that in the event of a no deal, probably lots of people are going to be trying to fly things through, right? So I think there comes a time when we have to think about fast-track lanes, what can we do for certain things that we want to prioritise to go through. All of that, I think, needs to be worked through, so when we get to the point where we unfortunately ended up in no deal, that those people who are on the front line have got some clear guidance about what to do so we can continue to ensure that medicines get to patients.
But as of yet, you don't have that guidance, or?
I think that's the phase that we're now moving into.
The Royal Pharmaceutical Society in the Sunday Times, I think, warned that there are already shortages and that these will get worse in the event of a no deal or a hard Brexit. Mr. Sawyer, you were on the radio this morning talking about the need for the government to take emergency powers in that scenario. Could you just explain why you think that's necessary?
Yes, in the context of a no deal, if there's no deal, I think, as Saffron referred to earlier, I think we need to make use of the NHS, if you like, and command and control mechanisms, because to allow for certainty of supply of the medicines we do have in the country at that time, because remember, in a no-deal scenario, we do believe the ports will be a challenge for some time. We think what medicines are in the UK should be managed more appropriately. For example, allowing pharmacists to substitute prescriptions, perhaps alternate prescriptions that will to medicines that they have available, allowing pharmacists to share and use other pharmacies' medicines, which they used to be able to do, but that they can't do that at the moment by law. So you could relax that law to allow a local community to share medicines around. And the other one I suggested this morning actually is to remove and stop all wholesale licenses for a limited time, because there's 2,500 of them out there. It allows for a lot of trading, allows for a lot of export of UK packs that should, we would want to keep in the country. Our members have 20 of those licenses, and we distribute 90% of the NHS medicines. So there's a lot of small businesses out there whose main business is not wholesaling and distribution. So if the government and the MHRA controlled it to just those businesses whose main purpose is distribution or only purpose is distribution, France has 35 wholesale licenses and that's what they do. We have 2,500 because it allows for a free market, which has produced very, very low prices for generics. So I can't deny that, and the government saved £11 billion over 10 years. But it would be a catastrophic time and no deal, I think, for medicine supply. And I'm not, pulling any punches. And I think we have to think of emergency powers.
But this could involve patients being put on drugs, different drugs from the ones they're used to, without a consultation with their GP.
Correct.
Just finally on the stockpiling, I want to actually really nail this one down with you, Mr. Sawyer and Mr. Thompson, and ask you directly, is the current advice from the Border Delivery Group to the industry that a 6-week stockpile will be sufficient for NHS patients in the event of no deal?
That's the current advice.
That's what we've been told.
Thanks. Patients listening to this evidence might be alarmed at some of the prospects for a no deal, potentially a catastrophic time, emergency powers, patients put on different drugs to the ones that they're prescribed. Should patients be stockpiling their own drugs?
No. I think we're here on behalf of patients. I think we're actually trying to sort this issue out and make sure politicians of all parties understand the concerns we have, because we are concerned. This is one of the last opportunities we might have to speak in this type of forum. We are very concerned as businesses. We can't plan against uncertainty. Certainly our businesses can't invest where our margins are very small. We need politicians to understand that there could be consequences of a no deal, and those are the consequences. We're not suggesting anybody needs to stockpile outside of the supply chain yet, but come January that might be a different picture, and we need to, as businesses in the supply chain, together with the government and the NHS, will have to communicate what needs to be done. But we believe, going to be in a difficult situation if there is not a deal by Christmas.